Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke and Mr. Lord Mayor. It's a delight to be here in Cork, and it is a delight to be back in Ireland. The last time I was here was 58 years ago. The country has changed, much for the better. In addressing an international audience, one must be careful to avoid cultural misunderstandings. I recall the speech given by an American businessman in Tokyo some years ago, in which he said, "Before I begin my formal address, I would like to express my condolences on the death of your Emperor Hirohito and the sympathy of the American people," at which the audience broke into laughter and wild applause. He was somewhat puzzled by that and asked afterwards, "They didn't understand a word that you were saying, but they do know that every American starts his speech with a joke, and they wanted to show their appreciation." What we have to discuss today, however, is no joking matter. We are heading for a crucial moment as the nations of the world face a time, the first time since we had major economic development, of an inability to increase the supply of oil. I will just divide my talk into three parts. First, I will talk about the peak. It is no longer the case that we have a few voices crying in the wilderness that we are not going to be able to continuously increase the supply of fuel oil, of crude oil. Secondly, I will talk about some of the realities of the energy market and the political market. And the third, I will talk about what to expect and what to do. First, on the question of peak oil, it is time to dispose of the issue. What you have heard lately from the National Petroleum Council, from the Energy Information Administration, from the International Energy Agency, constitutes a backdoor admission that in a decade or two we face a moment of truth over the capacity to produce crude oil. In the past, in the increasingly distant past, supply was easy to come by, all too easy in a sense. It was reflected in the rule of capture in the old days. It was reflected in Rockefeller's rationalization of the oil industry in the United States, the Texas Railroad Commission, the Seven Sisters, more latterly OPEC. We were fooled in part by the opening up of the Middle East, that this cornucopia of oil would continue more or less forever. But in that era, capacity always exceeded demand, and as a result, restrictions had to be imposed to prevent the wastage of oil. Now, however, the situation is transformed. Supply is increasingly difficult to increase, and notably in line with what is accelerating demand from the newly industrializing nations. Colin Campbell, our estimable chairman, has made a comment. In order to produce oil, you need to discover it. That seems reasonably straightforward, but its profundity is disguised by its apparent obviousness. Over the course of recent decades, we have discovered only 1 barrel of oil for every 3 that we produce. As a result, we face increasing difficulty in the future. The discovery of oil has been faltering, and for many years we were fooled by the opening up of the Middle East and by its flush production. But the old fields are now playing out, as we have seen recently in the Burgan field in Kuwait and the Cantarell in Mexico, in which production is rapidly declining, and we remain dependent upon these old fields. Even Ghawar, the vast Saudi Arabian field, shows signs of depleting. The National Petroleum Council in the United States says now that we need renewables, that we need conservation. We need all contributors from new energy sources in addition to oil, in addition to the traditional fossil fuels. In 1979, however, when Jimmy Carter talked of renewables, the leaders in the industry then assembled in New Orleans burst out laughing. In 1977, when Carter talked about conservation, the reaction from the industry was firm. Conservation is not the American way. Production is the American way. Those attitudes have been revised. Just remember that if we are to meet the EIA projections for 2030, given the decline rates in existing fields, we would need to find the equivalent of 4 or 5 new Saudi Arabias. And that strikes me as against the odds. So conceptually, the battle is over. The peakists have won. I was sitting next to an oil executive in New Mexico just recently, and he said to the audience, "Of course I'm a peakist. We're all peakists." He said, "I just don't know when the peak comes." But that represents part of a conceptual victory. And therefore, to the peakist I say, you can declare victory. You are no longer the beleaguered small minority of voices crying in the wilderness. You are now mainstream. You must learn to take yes for an answer and be gracious in victory. Winston Churchill, writing his great memoirs of the Second World War, had as his slogan, "In defeat, defiance. In victory, magnanimity." And people who have been peakists, who have been pessimists, need to be magnanimous, as Churchill advises. Important as it is, the precise day, the precise year, is less important than the overall conceptual victory. We now, as a society, as a worldwide society, recognize what is coming. We do see some resistance to the precise ideas of the peakists, and so I dwell for a moment on what's right and what's wrong. Part of what's wrong is that those who have been resisting the idea that we would reach a plateau just don't want to come right out and admit that they were wrong. But with regard to questioning of the precise details of what we describe as the peak. There is some truth in what the economists say. The peak has been described, as Hubbard did it, in narrow geological terms. And, of course, the geology is conclusive. But technology is also important, and we have a gradual, a steady increase in the technology with which we extract oil. And let me emphasize that because it is part of the longer-term solution. Not the technology to extract oil, but technology in general. Secondly, as prices rise, it becomes commercially viable to work harder to extract oil from existing fields. Now, this is what I'll call the limited truth in the worries of economists. Then there is also the caricature of the economist, with which I discussed with Cullen, who simply disregards geological reality and insists, following the laws of supply and demand, that if prices rise, supply will increase. That simple faith happens to be an error. Let me turn to my second subject, which is realities. I've said that there is a conceptual victory, but conceptual understanding of the peak oil problem is not sufficient to foster action. The first reality is political reality. So let me talk about what it is like in a democracy. The American public believes that if we achieve energy independence, we can lower energy prices. Energy independence, if such were available, is available at reduced costs. This may strike you as wishful thinking. It has in the past. In 1973, after the Arab oil embargo, President Nixon declared energy independence as the nation's goal. And within 6 months, we had a blueprint in the United States to achieve energy self-sufficiency by 1980. And as the years roll by, 1980, the last year of the achievement of energy independence, the importation of crude oil into the United States had increased by 60%. Today, it is over 3 times what it was in 1973. If you throw in oil products, even more. So, what do we have? Bear in mind what Senator Long of Louisiana, a longtime politician, observed. The first duty of a politician is to get elected. And his second duty is to get reelected. Cassandra was never popular, even in Greek mythology. A good politician, to get reelected, knows that it is not wise to bring bad news to the public, and it is even less wise to ask for sacrifice. Those of us who have tried over the years to get gas taxes raised in the United States can testify to that. It is also true not only that politicians do not like to bring bad news or to ask for sacrifice, that politicians think symbolically in terms of gestures and not in terms of quantitative significance. So there's much wishful thinking, and it goes on at the present time. Last year we had a congressional election. The Republicans were more or less swept out, or at least eased out, and the victorious Democrats laid down their plans for the future. Just after the election, they issued a pamphlet describing 6 goals for 2006. I would read: energy independence, lower gas prices, free America from dependence on foreign oil, and create a cleaner environment with initiatives for energy-efficient technologies and domestic alternatives such as biofuels, end tax giveaways to big oil companies, and enact tough laws to stop price gouging. I don't think anybody in this audience regards that promise as realism. This energy independence was supposed to be achieved by July the 4th of 2007, which many of you will recall as Independence Day. July 4th came and went, and nothing has happened. And the Congress still plays around with energy legislation, which each week becomes less impressive in its goals and stipulations. So what we do learn is that there is no magic wand. Even when we find alternatives look promising, bear in mind that there is no immediate creation or transformation of the critical infrastructure on which energy depends. The turnover of the auto fleet, for example, will take 20 years. In 2030, the terminal date for the present projections by the Energy Information Agency, we will still be roughly 80% dependent on fossil fuels. And so long as we depend on the internal combustion engine, we will depend on liquid fuels to transport us. So even if one studies the optimists today, the plateau will be coming soon enough. The National Petroleum Council, for example, indicates that the peak for the production of conventional oil will come in 2022 or 2023. That's only 15 years from now, and that is an optimistic projection. But the conclusion from political reality is that in order to have real movement, the public has to be hit over the head with a 2x4. 1973, the Arab oil embargo faded away in the public's memory. 1979, with the shutdown of Iranian oil production, faded. It is why arguments regarding the precise date by which the peak arrives, whether it's 2015 or 2025, regrettably remains secondary. Until you get the engagement of the public, we are to grapple effectively with the transition. Let me turn to my third subject, what to do and what not to expect. Our indefatigable organizer, Richard O'Rourke, sent me an email. He mentions that unlike Colin Campbell, he will not be 76 until the year 2050. So he didn't want just gloom and doom today. We have, and here is where the economists are right, we have economic incentives. As the price of oil reaches $80 a barrel, those entrepreneurial juices begin to flow. They are stirred up and they are eager to work. Indeed, it has become a passion in Silicon Valley to turn away from information technology to solving the energy problem. All power to them. It will be a lot more complex than they anticipate. But we will have and we will introduce new technologies. Necessity, remember, is the mother of invention, and human ingenuity should not be dismissed. Bearing in mind, as all too many do not, that developing cost-effective new technologies and deploying them en masse is very time-consuming. It takes 20 years to turn over the automobile fleet. It will take at least 15 to 20 years to introduce carbon capture and sequestration, if then. We have, of course, begun to move in the direction of ethanol, biofuels, but corn-based ethanol is no solution. It is part of the political game, as reflected in the fact that the United States government places a 54-cent tariff on the importation of ethanol from Brazil, where it is produced cheaply, in order to protect the American ethanol producers. But we have a future. It may not be based upon traditional crops like corn and soybeans, but it comes from waste, forest waste, agricultural wastes, new crops like strawgrass, and that is cellulosic ethanol. All that we need, and it is not easy to achieve, are new enzymes that will break down the cellulose. And this will come, but it may not come next year or even in the next decade. And when we get there, we will have a new source of fuel liquids. Then there is the area of batteries. The lithium-ion battery is showing steady signs of improvement. A Cambridge, Massachusetts company, A123, has developed a lithium-ion battery with which one can get 150 miles per gallon. This will, as it is deployed, and it will take decades to deploy it, reduce the need for gasoline. Remember, though, that there is no solution without a cost. As we move into lithium-ion batteries, it requires not less energy, but more energy. There is increased demand on electric power, and there is increased demand for coal-fired plants. That would seem to me to provide some hope for the future, for the Richard O'Rourkes who will be with us in the year 2050. Let me close by observing what not to expect, since I am here in Europe, in which the fight against global warming has become a passion. It is currently a passion in Washington, but it is probably a transitory passion. Don't expect too much with regard to the release of greenhouse gases. Remember that whatever occurs here in Europe, and even in the United States, there's China, there is India, there is Indonesia. China this year passed the United States in terms of the release of greenhouse gases. China, just this past year, laid down 100 gigawatts of new electric generating capacity, mostly coal-fired. That means 2 new 1,000-megawatt plants each week. Right now, China has surged to 2.3 billion tons per year of coal burn. It is projected to be at 4.5 billion tons, at least, by the year 2030. Now, it will take a lot of windmills in Denmark and elsewhere to offset what the Chinese are doing. The upshot is that we need to get on with what we can deal with in this century and do not expect to solve problems such as global warming without the participation of the major industrialized countries. Thank you very much, and I hope that this is a good conference.